So let's start by creating a new document from scratch. Choose File, New, and then slide over and choose New Document. Notice Command-N on Mac or Control-N on Windows is the keyboard shortcut for this command. Now you'll see the New Document dialog box, and we have several decisions to make here in this initial dialog box. First, you'll choose the number of pages. You can go 1, 2, 3, all the way up to 9,999 pages per document. That's a lot. We're just going to leave it at 1 for now because we're going to understand the basics of creating new documents. The next decision you have to make is whether or not you want facing pages. If you're working on a book or a magazine or newspaper, it would probably make sense to keep facing pages on. If, however, you're creating just something like a postcard or a display ad, you'd probably turn facing pages off. The next option here is Master Text Frame. Normally I don't use that feature, but on longer documents like books you might want to turn that on. In this case I'll leave it off and then jump to Page Size. We have several built-in US and international or metric sizes that you could choose. In this case I'm just going to leave it to the default of 8.5 by 11 inches letter size document. Leave it at portrait orientation, and then down here in columns we have a few other decisions to make. You can type in the number of columns or just use your up and down arrows to create columns. You can also decide whether or not you want a gutter, that is the space that divides the columns. That could be 0, or you can increase this value. Maybe you just want it 1 pica, that's a very common gutter value, and type that in. Now here at the bottom we get to determine the width of the margins. Think of the margins as your live or your safety area on your document. Frequently you'll use the same margin on all sides of the document. A lot of printers, desktop printers that is, are constrained to maybe printing within the last half or quarter inch of the page. If you're doing a professionally printed job, then you can probably use full bleed here and set this to whatever you'd like. A quarter of an inch is common maybe for a safety area. I'll just go ahead and leave that at a half an inch now, but I do want to click More Options, and we have a few advanced options here at the bottom. The first one is bleed, and when your final document is professionally printed, and if you want your images to stretch all the way to the edge of the trimmed sheet, then you'd want to use bleed. Typically, 1/8 of an inch is sufficient, so 0.125 IN, and because the link icon here is depressed, when we tab out of that field, all 4 fields will get the same value, 1/8 of an inch. That means we have 1/8 of an inch of breathing room around all sides of the document, top, bottom, inside and outside, or if I toggle facing pages off, you'll see that changes from left to right. And when that final piece is printed and trimmed, we have that 1/8 of an inch bleed, kind of a little bit of give around the document. Now we've added bleed to this document. I'm going to just press the tab key a couple times until I get to the bottom slug field. And at this point, I'm going to type in 1 IN, 1 inch. Now a slug is an area of a document that is outside the printed boundaries, but is a place to include some job tracking information, maybe who worked on the file, who was responsible for different pieces. In this case, I'm going to include a 1 inch slug on the bottom. Now here's the most important part about understanding how bleed and slug work in InDesign. Notice that even though I've made several changes here at the bottom, my page size here at the top is still 8.5 by 11 inches. It's still letter size. That's very different from virtually every other layout application, even Adobe Illustrator, because normally if you want bleed and slug, you have to build that into your document size. Here it's much more intuitive. Even though you add bleed and slug, your document size stays the document size. It's just a much smarter way of working. I think you'll really appreciate the changes. Now, before we're done here, we might want to click Save Preset. Save Preset remembers all of these settings. You know, this isn't rocket science, but there are a lot of values we've customized here. So I'll click Save Preset and give this a name. I'll call it Letter with 1 inch slug and click OK. Now by saving all of those settings as a document preset, we can see that it's available now at the top of the dialog box. We always have the default. Whenever you see a setting in brackets, know that you can't change that setting. That's built in, it's unchangeable. But you can always add and edit your own saved presets, in this case, Letter with 1 inch slug. After you're done setting up your document, go ahead and click OK.